What if the most powerful being in the entire galaxy was sitting on the ground starving while everyone walked past? What if the only one who stopped was a human? Not a king, not a warrior, not a powerful alien lord with centuries of wisdom behind his eyes. Just a regular human. In a universe full of dragons, aliens, and creatures with more power in one claw than most humans carry in their entire body, nobody stopped. Nobody cared. Nobody fed her. Until he did. And what happened next changed everything. This is the story of Kira, the outcasted dragon girl nobody wanted. The girl every species mocked. The girl who sat hungry in the middle of a busy alien marketplace, while hundreds of creatures walked right past her without a single glance. But here is what nobody saw coming. Here is what nobody expected. Here is the truth that will shake you right down to your core. The human who stopped was about to accidentally start something that would be talked about across 3 galaxies for 1,000 years. You are about to find out why one simple meal broke an ancient rule that had stood for 40,000 years. Why one act of kindness terrified the most powerful dragon lords in existence. And why, out of every single species in the known universe, only humans had what it truly took. Let me show you exactly how this happened. Her name was Kira. She was small. She was young. And by every standard the dragon world had ever built and enforced and passed down through generations, she was wrong. Most dragons were born with scales that announced what they were before they even opened their eyes. Deep ocean blue, or burning volcanic red, or brilliant gold that caught the light from 100 feet away and threw it back twice as bright. Their eyes glowed with the deep power of their bloodline from the moment they cracked their shells. Their wings spread wide and proud into the air before they had taken their first breath, already claiming space, already declaring that they were something worth noticing. Kira was none of those things. Her scales were a dull brownish gray, the kind of color that belonged to old stone after 3 days of rain. Her wings were thin and small, barely strong enough to lift her more than a few feet off the ground. Her eyes were plain, quiet amber, no glow behind them, no spark of ancestral fire, nothing that the dragon elders called the mark of lineage. She had been tested when she was 3 days old. The elder dragons had gathered around her egg the morning it cracked open. 5 of them, ancient and enormous, with scales the color of deep water and eyes that had watched centuries pass. They had stood in a quiet half-circle and waited as the little dragonling climbed out, shaking and blinking in the cold light of the hatching hall. They had looked at her scales. They had measured her wingspan. They had leaned close and looked directly into her eyes, searching for the ancestral fire that every true dragon was supposed to carry, that particular inner glow that told the world you were real. You were legitimate. You were part of the line. They found nothing. One elder turned away first. His enormous tail swept the floor as he turned his back. Then another. Then a third. Without a word. Without a sound. By the time Kira had fully stood on her own 4 legs for the first time, blinking at a world that was still brand new to her, every elder in the room had already walked out the door. Her mother had tried to protest. She had called after them, her voice cracking, saying that Kira just needed time, that the fire would come, that all dragons were different, and the test was not the whole story, and please come back and look again. Nobody turned around. It was decided that same morning. Kira would carry no clan name. She would be granted no territory. She would receive no training, no protection, no food from dragon stores or communal feeding grounds. She was declared fireless, which in dragon culture was not simply an insult. It was a verdict. It meant you were nothing. It meant you did not count. It meant the world was better organized without you in it. Kira was 3 days old when the world made that decision about her. She grew up on the edges of everything, on the cold outer rings of dragon territories, where the land was thin and the food was hard to find. She She learned early that moving too close to other dragons meant being chased away. She learned that asking for help meant being laughed at. She learned that the best way to survive was to be small and quiet and invisible, and to expect nothing, because expecting nothing meant you could not be disappointed. By the time she was 4 years old in dragon terms, still very young, barely more than a child, she had become very good at disappearing, at making herself background noise in a world that had no particular use for her. She had also learned something else. She had learned that hunger was not a temporary condition. It was just life now. The way the cold was life now, and the silence was life now. She had accepted it the way she had accepted every other thing about her existence, quietly, without complaint, without the dangerous luxury of hope. That was how she ended up in Voss Station. Voss Station was one of the largest trading hubs in the outer sector. A massive floating market built across 3 connected platforms where dozens of species gathered to buy and sell goods, food, and information from worlds that most beings in the inner systems had never seen. Aliens of every shape and size moved through its wide corridors at all hours. Merchants called out prices from colorful stalls. The smell of food from 50 different worlds drifted thick and warm through the recycled air. For Kira, it was both the best place and the worst place she could have ended up. The best because food was everywhere. She could smell it the moment she landed, rich, warm, overwhelming layers of it that made her stomach fold itself in half. The worst because she had nothing. No money. No goods. No name worth speaking. She had been walking through Voss Station for 3 days before everything changed. On the 3rd day, Kira was past desperate. She had found a small corner near one of the outer food stalls, where a merchant sometimes dropped things between transactions. Bits of food that slipped through the cracks. Small pieces that were not worth bending down for if you had money in your pocket. She waited there for hours. The merchant running that stall was a large tauren, a bull-like species with 4 broad arms and a wide, flat face that creased easily into a business smile. His stall was stacked high with crates of fruit, dried meat, and grain sacks from 6 planets. Trade was good. Customers flowed in and out all morning, and the merchant counted his credits with thick, satisfied fingers. He saw Kira twice. The first time, he glanced over mid-transaction, registered her sitting quietly in the corner, and looked away without any visible reaction. She was not a customer. She was not a threat. She was not anything worth interrupting his business over. The second time was worse. A small piece of dried fruit had rolled off the edge of his stall and come to rest near the platform's edge, maybe 2 feet from Kira's corner. It had been on the ground for over an hour. It was the size of her claw tip. She had been watching it for most of that hour, telling herself to wait, making sure nobody was watching, finally reaching her claw toward it. The merchant saw her. Without looking away from the customer in front of him, without any particular anger or cruelty in his expression, just casual, reflexive indifference, he reached out one of his 4 arms and kicked the piece of fruit away. It skittered across the platform and fell through a drainage grate. Kira pulled her claw back and sat very still. The merchant had already returned his full attention to his customer. The moment was already forgotten. To him it was nothing, less than nothing, a minor interruption of no consequence at all. Other species passed throughout the day. A group of tall silver-skinned Lyrans walked by carrying full market bags, one of them glancing at Kira with pale, cold eyes before moving on. A pair of crestborn, large feathered creatures famous for their pride and their disdain for weakness, actually stepped around her the way you step around something left on the floor, their orange crests faintly raised with irritation. One of them said something in their own language. Kira did not understand the words. She understood the tone perfectly. A tauren child ran past later, chasing a small mechanical toy. He stopped when he saw her, his brown eyes going wide with uncomplicated curiosity. Children sometimes had that. They had not yet been fully taught what to look past. For one moment, Kira felt something she could not afford to feel, the beginning of hope. Then the child's mother appeared behind him, grabbed his arm firmly, and pulled him away with one sharp word in Tauren that Kira had heard often enough to know. It meant worthless. She pulled the child away quickly, like Kira was something that might leave a mark. By mid-afternoon, the hunger had moved past her stomach and into her chest. It sat there heavy and insistent, pressing on her from the inside. Her legs felt weak. Her wings ached from being folded so tightly for so long. She had not eaten anything real since she arrived at Voss Station. What she had survived on would barely qualify as eating. She tried one more time. She approached a different stall, a smaller one operated by an older Neth, reptilian species with a reputation across the outer sectors for being more patient than most. She walked up slowly, making herself as small and unthreatening as possible. She said nothing. She simply looked at the food behind the counter and then looked at the merchant, letting her face do the asking. The Neth merchant looked back at her for a long, careful moment. Her yellow-slitted eyes moved from Kira's dull scales to her thin frame to her tucked wings. Then she reached under the counter, pulled out a spray bottle, and released short pressurized mist into the air in front of her stall. It was the standard Voss Station signal for unwanted visitors. She did not look at Kira again. Kira turned and walked back to her corner. She sat down, folded her wings, and lowered her head. She had stopped crying a long time ago. She no longer had the energy for it, and she no longer believed it served any purpose. So she simply sat, still and quiet and very small, in a corner of the biggest trading station in the outer sector, surrounded by more food than she had ever seen in her life. And then she heard footsteps stop beside her. The footsteps were different from all the others. Every other creature that had passed Kira that day moved in the rhythm of a world that had places to be. Their footsteps had a single pattern: arrive, pass, continue. The sound of a universe that had decided it had no business with her. These footsteps stopped. Kira did not look up right away. She had learned to be careful about that. Looking up too quickly sometimes made things worse. Sometimes a creature stopped near her to point. Sometimes to make a comment to the one walking beside them. Sometimes just to stand for a moment so they could carry the experience home, the way some beings collected small, interesting miseries that did not belong to them. So she waited. The footsteps did not move. After several seconds, she raised her head. He was human. She recognized the species without difficulty. Humans were well known across the outer sectors, not for their power, not for their technology, not for their long history or their military strength. Mostly they were known for being curious, and a little strange. They were soft by galactic standards, with no claws worth noting, and no natural armor and lifespans short enough that many outer sector species considered befriending one a minor emotional risk. Most species found them harmless and occasionally interesting. This one was young by human measurements. Mid-20s, maybe. Brown hair, an ordinary face, the average height that made humans look slightly small next to most outer sector species. He wore simple travel clothes, worn and practical, the kind worn by workers and wanderers who spent more time in transit than in any one place. A shoulder bag hung across one side of his body. In his hand he was holding a food packet, the sealed single-portion kind sold by vendors throughout the station. He was looking directly at her. Not past her, not through her, not with that particular blankness that meant a being was registering your presence and simultaneously choosing to do nothing with that information. He was actually looking at her face, at her tucked wings, at the thin set of her frame. His name was Marcus Vale. He was a transit maintenance worker, one of the humans who kept Voss Station's lower service corridors running during the hours when most of the station's paying visitors were asleep. It was not a glamorous job. It was not particularly well paid. Most of the higher status species in the station did not know his name and would have had no reason to learn it. He had been walking back from a 12-hour shift when he turned down the outer corridor and saw her. He had almost kept walking. Almost. There was something about the way she was sitting. Not aggressive. Not threatening. Not even particularly visible from a distance. She had gotten very good at being invisible. But something about her stillness stopped him. That particular quality of stillness, that was not the same as rest. The kind of stillness that said, I have decided to stop expecting things to change. He had seen that before. Not in a dragon. In a person. Years before he had left Earth for outer sector work. He had seen it in a child sitting outside a closed emergency shelter on a December night in a city that had stopped seeing people it could not conveniently accommodate. He had not walked past that child either. He crouched down to her level. Kira's eyes tracked him carefully. Every instinct she had was active, the old careful voice that had kept her alive this long, telling her to stay small, to be ready to move, to expect that whatever happened next would follow the same pattern as everything else. Marcus looked at the food packet in his hand. Then he looked at her. He held it out. Not thrown. Not dropped. Not placed on the ground with the particular careful distance that said he wanted to help without having to actually touch the situation. He held it out in his open hand, the way you hand something to someone you are treating as a person. Extended and waiting. Patient and quiet, with nothing in his expression that asked for anything back. Kira stared at it. She did not move. Marcus kept his hand out and waited, not with the impatience of someone performing a generous act and expecting it to be received quickly. Simply waited, the way you wait when you mean it, and you have decided the other person gets to decide the pace. Her claw reached out. She took it. She ate it fast. She could not help it. Her body took over the moment the food was in her claws. Old wiring, built over years of scraps and close calls, she tore the packet open and finished it in under 30 seconds. Hunched forward without thinking, one claw angled out in the old protective posture of something that expects what it has to be taken away. Marcus watched her without saying anything. When she was done, she looked up. Something happened then that she was not prepared for. Something she had not felt in so long that it took her a moment to identify it, turning it over slowly in her mind like a thing found on the ground that she could not quite name. She felt seen. Not assessed. Not dismissed. Not looked through by eyes that had already made their decision before they finished arriving at her. Seen by a pair of plain brown eyes that held no cruelty and no performance of pity. Just simple, quiet attention. The kind that said, you exist here, and I am here too, and that is enough reason to stop. Marcus reached into his bag. He pulled out a second packet, slightly larger, the kind he usually saved for the end of his shift when the walk back was long. He held it out the same way. Open hand, no rush, nothing attached to it. Kira took it faster this time. And this time, she ate more slowly. Not because the hunger had faded, it had not. Not yet, not truly. But something in her chest had shifted a fraction. Some tight old thing had loosened slightly. Enough to notice that she was not alone at this particular moment. Enough to slow down and let the food be something more than fuel. Marcus sat down on the platform floor beside her. He did not position himself above her. He did not stand over her in the way of performing generosity from a comfortable height. He sat down directly on the floor, back against the base of the stall, legs stretched out in front of him, and looked out at the market with the tired, unhurried expression of someone who had earned his rest and was going to take it right here. 3 creatures walked past in that time. One of them, a tall Lyran in expensive travel clothes. glanced down at the human sitting beside the dragon girl, and made a short sound that required no translation. Marcus did not react to it in any visible way. He simply watched the market. After a while he spoke. "Rough few days." His voice was quiet, not demanding, not loaded with the particular energy of someone who wants to be recognized for asking. Just a question left open in the air, with no requirement attached to it. Kira looked at him sideways. "You can tell. You looked like you had decided to become part of the floor," he said. Something happened then that surprised Kira nearly as much as the food had. Something involuntary, a short, small sound that came out before she could stop it. A breath and a click together, which, for a dragon, was the quiet beginning of a laugh. She had not made that sound in a very long time. Marcus smiled. Not a large performance of warmth. A small, quiet smile that appeared in the corner of his mouth and stayed there without demanding anything for itself. They sat in silence after that, but it was a different kind. Not the silence of being invisible. The other kind, the comfortable, uncomplicated kind that forms between two beings who have decided, without a word about it, that the other one is all right. Eventually Kira spoke. She was not certain why. She did not speak to people at Voss Station. She did not really speak to people anywhere if she could avoid it. But something about the way he had sat down, on the floor, at her level, without arranging himself above her, made her want to use her voice. "They tested me when I was 3 days old," she said. "I failed." Marcus looked at her without moving. He did not say that was terrible. He did not say he was sorry. He simply waited, the same way he had waited with the food, open and patient and without pressure. "Every dragon is supposed to carry the ancestral fire," she said. "In their eyes. The elders check when you hatch. If they cannot see it, you are declared nothing." She paused. "They could not see mine." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Who are the elders?" She looked at him. "What?" "Who decided they get to do that?" he said. "Who gave them that job?" Kira had never once, in the full span of her life, thought to ask that question. Nobody had ever asked her that. Through every cold night on the outer ring, through every stall that had turned her away, through every creature that had looked at her dull scales and looked away again, through all of it, not her mother, not the other outcasted beings she had crossed paths with, not the dark, quiet voice in her own head that had spent years making peace with the verdict. Nobody had ever once questioned the system that had cast her out. The elders decided. That was the rule. The rule was the world. You did not ask who built the world. You simply lived in it, or failed to live in it, and either way the world continued without much concern about which. But Marcus had asked who gave them the job. It was such a plain question, so simple and direct that it almost seemed naive. And yet Kira sat there on the floor of Voss Station and realized, with a strange, unsettling sensation in her chest, that she had absolutely no answer for it. "They have always decided," she said. "It is tradition." "Right," Marcus said. "So nobody elected them. Nobody chose them. They simply decided that they were the ones in charge of deciding who was worth something." He said it with no particular heat. No speech attached to the back of it. Simply as an observation, delivered in the same tone, you might use to note that a transit line was running late. Kira looked at the floor. The market continued moving around them. Transactions completed. Ships arrived and departed from the platforms overhead with low mechanical thunder. The universe went on being efficiently indifferent. "In my species," Marcus said after a moment, "we spent most of our history doing the same thing. Different words for it. Different tests. Different categories of people who got to decide who mattered and who didn't." He looked at his hands briefly. "It took us a very long time to understand how wrong we were getting it. And honestly," he added, We are still working on it. Kira watched him. You are still getting it wrong, she said. It was not an accusation. Just a plain observation from a creature who had dealt with enough species to have a realistic picture of all of them. Every single day, Marcus agreed without flinching. He reached into his bag again and removed a small container of dried fruit, the compact kind maintenance workers carried for long shifts. He opened it and set it on the floor between them. Casually, the way you set something on a table between two people who are just talking. Kira looked at the container, then at him. Why did you stop? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. Because you looked like someone who needed someone to stop. Others saw me, she said. They did not stop. I know, he said. He did not expand on it. He did not explain what made him different from them, or better than them, or more worthy of credit. He simply acknowledged the fact plainly, without drama, without making it about himself, and left the space open. Kira picked up a piece of fruit from the container. My name is Kira, she said. It was the first time she had offered her name voluntarily to another being in over a year. Marcus, he said. The afternoon light inside Voss Station shifted from gold to deep amber as the observation panels above them cycled through their evening sequence. The market sounds continued, vendor calls and transaction tones and the distant percussion of freight being loaded. Neither of them noticed at first that something had changed in the air around them. But something had. The flow of the market had altered slightly, the way a current changes when something new enters the water. Several passing merchants had slowed without stopping. A young Lyran student had come to a full halt 20 feet away and was watching with an expression that was not casual. Two Crestborn who had been moving toward the far corridor had turned around and were now standing near a support pillar with their feathered crests slightly raised, which in Crestborn body language indicated serious, involuntary attention. No one said anything. No one moved closer. But the orbit of that section of the market had quietly shifted, in the invisible way that things shift when something genuinely unusual enters a space. A human was sitting on the platform floor sharing food with a fireless, outcasted dragon. In the outer sectors, in Voss Station, in a universe with very firm opinions about who deserved what and why, that was not a thing that happened. And the ones who had stopped were beginning to feel, without quite being able to explain it, that something about this dragon girl was not what they had assumed. Something they had walked past. Something that had been there all along. It started with her eyes. The young Lyran student who had stopped was the first to notice. She was in her second year at the Outer Sector Academy, specializing in ancestral biology and deep field energy signatures. She had been walking back from a supply run when something at the edge of her peripheral vision made her slow down without meaning to. She watched the small dragon girl sitting beside the human. She watched for nearly a full minute before she understood what she was looking at. A flicker. Faint, so faint it would have been invisible to any eye that was not specifically trained for it. A thin, deep thread of amber light moving inside the dragon girl's eyes. Not on the surface. Not in the visible spectrum at all. Somewhere underneath. The student pulled out her scanner without thinking. The reading came back in 3 seconds. She stared at the number. She looked at Kira. She looked at the number again. Her hands had begun to shake. Marcus noticed first. He nudged Kira gently and tilted his head toward the Lyran student, who was now walking toward them slowly, the careful, measured approach of someone who does not want to disturb something fragile. She held the scanner out so both of them could see the display. Her voice, when she found it, was precise and quiet, the way academic voices become when the person behind them is working very hard to remain composed. Can I ask you something? Kira looked at the reading on the scanner without understanding it. What is that number? The student opened her mouth. Closed it. Tried again. That is your ancestral fire reading, she said. Kira went very still. I do not have an ancestral fire. The elders tested me 3 days after I hatched. They found nothing. The elders, the student said carefully, used a standard visual spectrum test. She held up the scanner. This uses deep field resonance imaging. It reads energy at frequencies the visual spectrum cannot detect. She paused. Frequencies that no living eye, including elder dragon eyes, can naturally perceive. Silence sat between the three of them. That reading, the student continued, her voice dropping lower, is not a standard ancestral fire signature. She looked at Kira directly. It is the ember of origin. The two crestborn at the pillar made a sharp, simultaneous sound. The Tauran merchant, with 4 arms, turned away from his customer. The older Neth who had sprayed her stall earlier turned around very slowly, her yellow eyes wide and unblinking. The ember of origin. It was not a myth. It was a documented entry in the oldest galactic databases of 12 separate civilizations. A fire so ancient and so deep that it had never operated on any frequency that living eyes could detect. Not ordinary eyes. Not extraordinary eyes. Not even the ancient, century-sharpened eyes of dragon elders. The last recorded carrier had lived 40,000 years ago. And that carrier had not been impressive, according to the records. Not large, not fast, not powerful in any way that the systems of that age had known how to measure. They had been an outcast, declared worthless by the tests of their time, left to survive on the margins. But the records also described what the ember of origin did. It did not spread through victory. It did not spread through conquest, or through battle, or through any mechanism that the galaxy's various power structures would have recognized or respected. It spread through contact, through connection, through the specific kind of warmth that passes between beings in the moment when one of them chooses to see the other, truly see them, and acts on it. Wherever the ancient carrier had fed the hungry, wherever they had sat down beside the abandoned, wherever they had held something out in an open hand, something of that fire had transferred. Quietly, invisibly, carried in the space between two beings who had decided the other one mattered. Kira sat completely still. She thought about 3 days old, wet from the egg, blinking in the cold light of the hatching hall, while elders walked away without looking back. She thought about years of edges and margins and corners and cold. She thought about every creature that had looked through her as though she were already gone. Then she thought about a tired human worker with a food packet and a 12-hour shift behind him. She turned and looked at Marcus. He was looking back at her with that same unhurried expression, like a man who had just heard the most remarkable news in the known galaxy and was quietly deciding where to put it. He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Told you the elders didn't know what they were doing." And Kira laughed. A real laugh, warm and clicking and cascading. A dragon laugh that she had not produced since she was too small to remember making it. It moved through her whole body and out into the air of Voss Station, strange and bright and completely unguarded. And in her eyes, for the first time in her life, in a place where others could actually see it. Something ancient lit up gold. Here is what the records never told you. The ember of origin was never supposed to be loud. It was never designed to be obvious. It was never meant to announce itself to any test that powerful beings had constructed to sort the worthy from the worthless. That was the entire point of it. Every system ever built to measure value, every test, every tradition, every ancient standard set by confident elders with certain eyes, had been built to recognize things visible on the surface. Power that announced itself. Fire that could be seen and ranked and placed in order. The ember of origin lived underneath all of that. It had always lived there, in the ones passed over, in the ones cast out, in the ones that every measuring system had examined and dismissed and forgotten about by the end of the morning. And for 40,000 years, and in Kira's case, for the full length of her short, cold, difficult life, it had waited. Patient beyond patience. Invisible beyond the reach of every tool ever built to look for it. It had not awakened when she survived the outer rings. It had not activated when she endured the cold or the hunger or the contempt. Those things had not been the signal. The signal was a market floor, an ordinary afternoon, an open hand. Because that was what the ember of origin was tuned to. Not strength displayed, not fire declared. The specific frequency generated in the moment when two beings, in the middle of a universe that had decided neither of them was particularly important, looked at each other and chose to act as though the other one mattered. Marcus never fully understood what he had triggered. He had stopped because she needed someone to stop. That, to him, was the beginning and the end of the calculation. He was a maintenance worker on a 12-hour shift, and there was a hungry creature in a corner and he had food. The elders of the dragon world would eventually learn what they had tested with the wrong instrument, what they had measured incorrectly on the third morning of a new life and abandoned with complete confidence. History is patient about those corrections, but it does make them. Kira went on to do things the records across 12 civilizations are still being written about. All of it began with one human who had one food packet, one long shift behind him, and the simple, unremarkable decency to sit down on the floor. If this story opened something in you today, stay with us just a moment longer. Let us bring it all back together one final time. A dragon girl spent her entire existence being evaluated by the wrong measurement. Every elder, every test, every ancient tradition built with total confidence had looked at Kira and found nothing. Because they were looking for the wrong thing, through the wrong lens, at the wrong frequency. And the cost of that error was a young life spent cold and hungry, and invisible on the margins of a universe that had moved on without her. One human changed that, not because he possessed power the galaxy would have recognized, not because he had status or influence or anything that the important species of the outer sectors tracked and valued. He changed it because he stopped, because he sat down, because he held something out in an open hand and waited, without demanding anything back, without requiring the moment to be about him. That is the most human thing in this entire story. And it is also, according to the oldest records in 12 civilizations, the most consequential thing any being has ever done. The universe is full of tests, full of systems that will measure you before you finish arriving, and declare their results with complete confidence, and move on. Full of elders in every form, institutions, traditions, crowds, quiet voices that have been there so long you have started to believe they belong to you, who will tell you what you are worth before you have had time to find out. Kira's story leaves one question worth sitting with after the screen goes dark. What fire are you carrying that the wrong test cannot see? Now we want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now and tell us honestly, if you had been walking through Voss Station that day, would you have stopped? The market was full of beings who would have said yes if asked. Every single one of them kept walking. Be honest. That is the only kind of answer worth leaving. If this story reached something in you, hit the like button right now. It costs you nothing, and it helps this channel put stories like this one in front of more people who need them. If you are new here, subscribe, because every week we bring you the most powerful HFY and sci-fi stories being told anywhere. And we are just getting started. The next story on this channel involves a species that declared formal war on humanity, not because humans were violent, not because humans were expanding too fast, but because humans kept doing something so simple, so consistent, and so completely inexplicable to every other species in the galaxy that they decided it had to be a weapon. What was it? Something so ordinary it will make you laugh first, and then it will make you think for a long time after. It is already uploaded and waiting for you on this channel right now. We will see you there.